I think it's really hard to forgive other people because it's really hard to forgive ourselves. The way that we're all raised, although the details are different, the names are different, the relationships might even be different, but there's a lot of parallels in our trauma. There's a lot of expectations that I'm noticing in my friends that have been handed down to them by their parents or older siblings or grandparents or even partners that have just added to this really toxic inner voice that is just constantly challenging them to be something more than what they are. And I know this is true of me too, because I've always felt that. So, how can we learn to accept and forgive ourselves? Well, it's a lot of work, and maybe it's easier said than done, but it's easily one of the most transformative things I've ever done with my life. So, good morning, brothers and sisters. My name is Christian. For those of you who don't know me, I'm primarily a musician, but recently decided to start making videos on topics that have changed me and made me who I am today, in the hopes of, sharing this information with other people that might be going through similar things or feelings, and, just to show that you're not alone in your suffering. And I know that in my own journey, my feeling of aloneness was probably the most painful part, at least emotionally anyway. I mean, there's plenty of physical that I could get into as well, and I might as well get into for this video because I want to talk about forgiveness. Forgiving people that have wronged us, lied to us, done terrible things to us, abused us. And all of these things we are guilty of doing to ourselves. So, forgiving ourselves, ultimately. Ever since I was a little kid, I had a dad that had high blood pressure, was overweight, and was just so quick to anger. In fact, that was the only emotion that was truly expressed through him. And I understand now that he was just doing the best he could with his life experiences and how he was raised and all the trauma that he's been through. That even though everything he was doing was physically, mentally, and emotionally abusive to me and my brother, it was all done in the hopes that we would turn out better than he would. So I understand the sentiment. It doesn't justify his actions. And in this video, I don't want to make it seem like I'm justifying abusers in any way, because there is no justification for abuse. Even if there are little nuggets of truth for us to take out of our suffering and for us to incorporate into who we are, become stronger and more resilient. There's a lot I've learned too from other people. So I didn't necessarily have to walk in everyone else's shoes in order to learn the lessons. So my hopes in sharing a video like this is anyone that's struggling with forgiving themselves, forgiving their abusers, forgiving other people in general, that maybe this inspires you in a way to learn how to forgive in a way, or just be open to it in a way. We are all on our own journey, so I don't think that it's appropriate to tell other people what they should do. So that's not the goal of this video. The goal of this video is just to share my experience with forgiveness and what it's done for me. And maybe it'll inspire you to forgive a little too. But, so I grew up with an abusive dad. It was very physical when I was really young. And when I was like 13 years old, maybe 12 years old, around that time, me and my younger brother both moved in with my father. He won custody from my mom. And this was already after years of abuse and not wanting to go on visitations with him, not just because I feared the abuse, I feared the anger, I feared the yelling, but also because whether he meant it or not, he gave me the option. If you don't want to be here, don't come. And so I was like, okay, this is an easy decision for me to make now that you gave me that decision. But that, along with how impressionable I was as a little kid, you know, being told to say certain things for my mom or for my grandmother on my mom's side against my father in court as a little kid. So I created a lot of bad blood with my dad. I guess that was my way of retaliating against the abuse, because I didn't have the courage to confront him directly, because he was a very physically imposing guy, like almost 400 pounds, 6'2", and always quick to anger. But I understand now, after all the work that I've done and all the conversations that I've had with him since then, that he was just doing the best that he could. I could only imagine how scary it must have been to be a father at 29 with an even younger spouse at 22, having a kid without having a foundation of your own. Like, I don't think that it's wrong to, you know, get divorced or to separate from a partner. I've dated 5 or so different people that I was very much committed to and intertwined with, that I wound up parting with. I didn't have any kids with them. I didn't get married. I came close a couple times, but at the end of the day, I realized that it was better for them and for me to go our own way. So I think my parents' divorce was the right decision, and they shouldn't have stayed together for the kids. But when you're a little kid, you think that something's wrong if your parents aren't together, because most of the kids around you that you see, they have 2 parents. Whether they like their parents or not, or they're annoyed by their parents, that it's just like a normal thing. But what I had never really felt normal, not just because of the divorce, but because no one in my family ever really liked each other. Even the family members that lived together, there was all this tension and all this like distance emotionally. But I guess just to fast forward to living with my father, at age 13, I created all this bad blood before moving in with him. And my father very much wanting to control, very much wanting to, even though he meant well, force certain outcomes for me and my brother by, making us go to karate or play football, or, shaming us out of certain things by making fun of us. A lot of the years that I spent living with my father were spent shaming me for being overweight. And then when I lost the weight, it was shaming me for my lack of intelligence, because I was a very quiet kid before my mom passed away. And then when my mom passed away, I just dove headfirst into music, and music was my saving grace. I was really into punk rock at the time, so I got into, somehow was able to convince my dad to let me do this because he was very controlling, but I got into getting piercings and dyeing my hair and all these things. And even though my dad would sort of let me do this, he would still shame me for it, which was funny, looking back, because I realized that all of this shaming that my father was doing wasn't just because he didn't want me to live a hard life and he was trying to steer me in the right direction or whatever, but also he had a lot of shame for himself. He still does. I spoke to him earlier today and he was telling me about how, like, you know, he's kind of sick and he doesn't feel good and how he feels miserable. And I feel a lot of like sympathy and empathy for him, but like also every time I speak to my father, even when he's not sick, he's always, you know, depressed. He's always telling me about how miserable he is. And I think that now that a lot of the anger isn't there, and he doesn't have that level of control over like me and my brother the way that he did when we were little kids living with him, that all of that has been peeled away, and the deeper layers of just like this like sadness and deep shame that he has for himself and this guilt is all present. In 2009, I had to leave that house. I was graduating high school. My dad wanted me to stay, get a full-time job and help him pay the bills. But I knew that I wasn't meant to stay tethered to my father, my abuser, for the rest of my life. In fact, at this point in my life, I wanted nothing more than to be on my own, be away from everyone, figure myself out. And the only way I could do that was by leaving this house. And the way that I left this house was by somehow getting a scholarship for my first year of college, because I played football and lacrosse in high school. And my grandparents were also willing to help as well, which is really nice, when I shifted over to community college. But being able to dorm was my gateway to leaving this house and being on my own. In a lot of ways, I needed those 5 years, because it took me 5 years to ever talk to my father again. And the funny thing is, after, you know, being locked in a dog cage and having like water thrown on me, or like being thrown across a room or shoved downstairs, or, you know, or just being forced to eat old stale food or whatever it is, just like this weird like torture porn that my dad was into. Like, after all those events, I think most people would never talk to their parent again. And I was very much in that mentality too, you know. But within those 5 years of not talking to my dad, I went through a lot of changes. I started meditating. I started looking at deeper parts of myself. I, even through the lens of music, started being more authentic and true to myself. I wasn't trying to emulate all the artists that I was looking up to anymore. I was trying to find my own voice and break away from you know, trying to become something other than what I am, which is just me. And meditating, Eastern philosophy, certain deep kinetic relationships that were developing in 2012, all of these things combined led me to such a place of inner peace that within the depths of my meditation, I was able to find forgiveness for my father. Forgiveness enough to open myself up to talking to him again, seeing him again, but it had to be on my terms. Keep him at arm's length, essentially. because I didn't want to fall back into the relationship that we had. Even if I wasn't living with him, I know that the potential for that was there. And even though this was 10 years ago, so even though a whole decade has passed since then, I know that the potential is still there, because when I speak to my father, even though he's on blood pressure medication, he also smokes a ton of weed too, so that mellows him out. But he also lost a lot. When I started talking to him again, his mother passed away, my grandmother on his side. In the time that I wasn't talking to him, him and my younger brother had a falling out, and my younger brother left the house. So, and then also our childhood dog passed away. So all these things that he was used to having there were leaving his life, to the point where it started making him realize what he had and how he was taking it for granted by how he was treating it. So, in a way, the 5 years of me not talking to my father weren't just healing for me, but it was for him too. Loss opens space and creates the space to basically just be with yourself and acknowledge the absence of what used to fill that space. And it's tied to my performance name, Morning Coffee. This is what the morning process is. It's acknowledging the space created in the absence of something, whether it's a person, a place, or a thing. And for me, coming to that place on my own, that forgiveness, was the only way that I could ever open myself up again to seeing my father after everything. And in finding that, so the way that I was able to find that was trying to understand things from his perspective. And I think that being open to someone else's perspective when they're not around, but understanding them enough to where you could understand their perspective with, some thought and a lot of openness. For me, that was much better than trying to be open to his perspective in his presence, because there was still a lot of healing and a lot of hurt and a lot of anger on my part that was created from the relationship that we had. So, coming to this place of forgiveness, I was able to finally have a relationship with my father that never existed. My father and I never had deep conversations before. We were never able to talk about the abuse that was going on, God forbid, because it would just cause more, or address past events, things that have happened. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, but forgiving my father allowed me to have a relationship with him for the first time. And it allowed him to open up. For the first time in my life, talking to my father about certain things that have happened in the relationship we used to have growing up, coming from a place of compassion yet honesty, he was admitting, this is someone that would never admit to anything that he's done wrong before, but admitting that he shouldn't have taken us from our mother, admitting that he shouldn't have put his hands on us, admitting that he was wrong and that he feels guilty. And the way that I received that was just pure compassion, because I understood the weight of what he was doing and the tears he was shedding. And this was over the course of years. It wasn't immediately in 2013, but from 2013 to 2017. And then from 2017 to now, there was just breakthrough after breakthrough. Being able to dive deeper, but also just be present and not let the weight of the past dictate the relationship we have now. It's as if we're entirely two different people experiencing a brand new relationship together. And that is the key. The key is not to forget the past and pretend it never happened, but to allow the present moment be what it is and not have the ghosts of our past stain the present moment, because they're all just memories. Even our traumas are just memories. What is happening right now in this present moment is more real than anything we've ever been through. And I know that might be hard to hear, because for me, that's hard to accept, because what I've been through is incredibly physical and incredibly painful. But it's my identification with that pain, my attachment to it, that keeps it so alive, or has kept it so alive. And I don't think you should just take this and forget about it, but understand that all that we've been through are just shadows, and that we have the power now to transform our lives into whatever we want them to be, with the exception of external factors, obviously. But coming to a place of forgiveness for me allowed me to not only just have a better relationship with my father, but to actually have closure with him. To heal in a way, and to create the space for him to do the same for himself, to open up about his past and how he was abused and neglected. And it sounded a lot of the things that he was projecting onto me when I was a kid growing up with him, it sounded a lot of like what he was going through. And he carried that with him his whole life up until